Picture the most powerful man in the world sitting on a padded box. Now fill the room with the smell of what he's doing on it. Add velvet walls, a fire that never goes out, a silver basin of rose water, and a man kneeling beside the box with a strip of linen in his hand. A man wearing more gold on his fingers than your entire village will see in a century. That kneeling man is not a servant. He is one of the richest, most envied, most dangerous men in England. Dukes flatter him. Ambassadors bribe him. Grown men who command armies wait outside that door, hoping he will mention their names. His job, his actual official salaried job, is to attend the King of England while the King empties his bowels, and to clean him afterward. And here is the part nobody tells you. Hundreds of gentlemen would kill for that job. Some of them quite literally did. That's the Tudor court. The most glittering, perfumed, poetry-writing, lute-playing place in England. Built directly on top of a machine that runs on fear, sewage, and proximity to one enormous, rotting, terrifying human body. A place where you could dance a galliard with an earl's daughter in the evening and be carrying the king's chamber pot before dawn. A place where the closer you stand to the smell, the higher you rise. We're going back there tonight, not as tourists gawping at portraits of a fat man in a feathered hat. We're living it. One young man inside the most private room in the kingdom, over the course of the days that will decide the rest of his life. Everything he would have seen, smelled, heard, touched, and survived. So, I make these history stories, and honestly I still have no idea whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just quietly fascinated by the fact that wiping a king was once the summit of human ambition. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. The problem starts before you even open your eyes, and the problem is this. The man you're supposed to replace is not dead yet. His name is Sir William Compton. No, not the famous one. This is another William. Sir William Paulet's cousin's boy, though at court everyone is somebody's cousin's boy. And for 11 years he has held the office you've been quietly, shamefully, desperately praying to inherit. Groom of the Stool, Chief Gentleman of the Privy Chamber, Keeper of the King's Privy Purse, the man who kneels beside the close stool, and 3 days ago he began to cough blood into his handkerchief, and hide the handkerchief in his sleeve, and everyone in the Privy Chamber saw him do it. And nobody said a word, because at this court you do not say the true thing out loud. You wait, you watch, you position yourself. You're 22 years old. Your name is Thomas Merrick, and you are the youngest of the 6 grooms of the Privy Chamber, which means that on paper you are already one of the dozen or so men in England permitted to touch the king's body. In practice, you're the one who carries the wood, warms the linen, tastes nothing, decides nothing, and sleeps on a straw pallet outside the king's bedchamber door like a well-dressed dog. And this morning, in the black cold before dawn, the pallet is where you wake, not because you chose to, but because through 3 inches of oak, you have just heard the king groan. Your eyes open to darkness. For half a second you've forgotten where you are, and in that half second you're back in Herefordshire, in your father's draughty manor with its 4 servants and its mortgaged orchards, and you are nobody, and it is wonderful. Then it hits you, the smell, not one smell, layers. Tallow smoke from the rushlight guttering in its iron bracket down the gallery. Mutton fat burning, greasy and church-like. Cold stone and old rushes underneath it. The dusty, faintly sour smell of a floor that has held 1,000 booted feet. wood smoke drifting under the door from the fire that is kept burning in the king's bedchamber every hour of every night of every year, winter and summer, because the king's physicians say cold air breeds rheums, and nobody argues with the king's physicians except the king. Beneath that, sweeter and stranger, the ghost of yesterday's perfumes, civet and rosewater and orris root, rubbed into velvet, hanging in the dead air of the gallery like the memory of a woman who left the room hours ago, and underneath everything, always, faint but unkillable, the smell of men. 40 gentlemen and grooms and pages sleeping within 60 feet of you in their clothes, most of them unwashed since Sunday, including you. Welcome to Greenwich Palace. Welcome to the Privy Gallery of Henry VIII, King of England and of France, Defender of the Faith, Lord of Ireland. Welcome to January in the year of our Lord 1539, in the 29th year of his reign, in the 5th year after he broke with Rome and made himself in effect God's deputy on this island. You're lying on a canvas pallet stuffed with straw on the floorboards of a gallery directly outside the door of the royal bedchamber on the side of the palace that faces the river, and you can hear the Thames even now. The slap and suck of black water against the palace stairs, the creak of a barge straining at its mooring, a waterman coughing somewhere out in the dark, half a mile of freezing river between you and the lights of Deptford. The groan comes again through the door, lower this time, then a word you can't make out, thick with sleep and pain, and then, unmistakably, your name. Merrick. Not shouted. The king does not need to shout. A door and a wall and 30 feet of distance, and still the voice finds you like a hand closing on the back of your neck, because you have spent 4 months training your ears to hear exactly this. The way a mother hears her infant through a storm. You are up before you are awake. That is the truth of this job that no one at home would believe. Your body has learned to obey before your mind has learned to be afraid. Bare feet on oak boards so cold they burn. You are sleeping in your shirt and hose. Everyone does. Undressing fully is for men with heated bedchambers. And now your fingers are already dragging your doublet off the hook, and they are stiff, clumsy, the knuckles aching in the cold, and the points won't tie. The little laces that fasten doublet to hose slipping through fingertips that feel like someone else's. You get 4 of them tied. Good enough. In the dark, nobody counts your points. You stoop to the rushlight, cup your palm behind the flame, a small dirty petal of light trembling with your breath, and lift it out of the bracket. Hot fat runs down the stem and across your thumb. You don't flinch. You learned in your first week not to flinch. Flinching spills the light, and a man who arrives at the king's bedside in darkness has already failed. The bedchamber door is guarded from the inside by the gentleman on night watch, and tonight the gentleman on night watch is Sir William Compton, who is dying, and the door opens before your knuckles touch it, and there he is. He looks worse than yesterday. That's the first thing you see, and the first thing you make your face not show. 51 years old and suddenly ancient, the skin of his cheeks gone the colour of church candles, sweat standing on his forehead in a room where you can see his breath. But his ruff is straight. His chain of office lies perfectly on his shoulders. He has been awake all night beside the king's bed, and he is dying on his feet, and every fold of him is correct, because that is the entire religion of this room. The body may be failing, the kingdom may be trembling, the king may be groaning in the dark, but the linen is white, the fire is fed, and the surface never, never breaks. His Grace's leg, Compton says very quietly, just that. 3 words, and your stomach drops through the floorboards. Because here is the thing you understood within a week of arriving at court. The thing that is never written in the ambassador's letters and never spoken above a whisper. The King of England, the giant of Europe, the man who wrestled the King of France, 6'2" in his stockinged feet, the most magnificent prince in Christendom, is rotting. There is a hole in his left leg, above the ankle and below the knee, an ulcer left over from a jousting fall 3 years ago, and it does not heal. It closes and swells and blackens and has to be cut open again. When it closes, poison backs up into his body and his face goes grey and his temper goes murderous. When it opens, the smell reaches the far end of the Privy Chamber, and grown men, soldiers, courtiers, men who have smelled battlefields, breathe through their mouths and keep their faces smooth as glass. And the men whose job it is to be in the room with that leg at 3 o'clock on a black January morning are exactly 2. The dying man in front of you and you. Hot water, Compton says. Fresh linen, the Egyptiacum from the coffer. The physician's salve, the dark one, not the white. And Merrick. His hand closes on your sleeve and the hand is burning hot. You can feel the fever straight through the wool. Whatever you see in there, whatever you smell, your face is a wall. Do you understand me? Kings forgive theft sooner than they forgive disgust. You understand him. You will spend the rest of the night learning how much. Getting hot water at 3 in the morning in a Tudor palace is not turning a tap. There are no taps. There's a fire in the page's closet at the end of the gallery, banked under ash for the night, and there is a copper kettle, and there is a boy of perhaps 12 named Rafe, who sleeps beside that fire precisely so that moments like this one can happen, and you shake him by the shoulder, and he is awake instantly, the way children who serve kings learn to be, and you say, water for his grace, and nothing more. And he's already raking back the ash with an iron, already blowing the embers, cheeks puffing, orange light crawling up his face, and you leave him to it because you have your own errands. The linen lives in a cypress wood chest that smells of the cypress and of lavender laid between the folds, and your hands know the good cloth from the ordinary by touch alone now, in the dark. The fine holland is cool and dense and slightly slick under the fingertips, like the skin of something living, and the coarse stuff catches on the rough patches of your hands. 4 months ago your hands had no rough patches. You were a gentleman's son who had never carried anything heavier than a hawk. Now the right palm has a hard ridge at the base of the fingers from hauling faggots of wood, and the left thumb is cracked at the corner of the nail from cold water, a little red split that opens every morning and stings every time it touches lye soap, and you have stopped noticing it except at moments like this, when the lavender gets into the crack and burns. The salve is where Compton said, in the physician's coffer, and the coffer is locked, and the key hangs on Compton's own belt, so back down the gallery you go, past the shapes of sleeping men, a gentleman usher snoring against the wall with his mouth open, 2 pages curled together like puppies under one cloak, all of them the sons and nephews of knights and lords, all of them sleeping on floors for the privilege of being here. And you take the key from a dying man's belt while he stands swaying with his eyes half closed, and neither of you says anything about the fact that in a week, perhaps 2, someone will take everything from that belt. Then the water is ready, steam rising off the copper in the freezing air of the closet, and Rafe wraps the kettle handle in rags for you, and you carry it back down the gallery with the muscles of your forearm burning. the metal ticking softly as it cools, hot breath of steam against your chin, rushlight in the other hand, salve pot tucked into your doublet against your chest where you can feel its cold weight over your heart, and then the bedchamber door, and then in. The king's bedchamber at Greenwich is not large. That surprises everyone. The presence chamber where he sits under his canopy of estate could stable 40 horses. The Privy Chamber beyond it could hold 100 dancers. But the room where the King of England actually sleeps is scarcely bigger than a yeoman's parlour, because a small room holds heat, and heat is life. And the fire in the corner has been fed all night, and the air in here is thick as soup. Wood smoke and beeswax from the good candles, the animal warmth of the great bed with its mountain of feather mattresses, the herbs strewn in the rushes crushed underfoot giving up a bruised green sweetness. And over all of it, through all of it, the leg. You know the smell now. You will know it for the rest of your life. Old men who served in this chamber will catch a thread of it decades from now, in a sick room, in a butcher's shambles in August, and be instantly 20 again and terrified. It is sweetish. That is the horror of it. Not the honest stench of a jakes or a dunghill, which the nose forgives, but something sweet and wrong underneath, like meat on the turn dressed with honey, and it comes from the body of the man who owns England. He is sitting up against the bolsters, and the firelight does him no favours and every favour at once. This is what you can never explain to your family in Herefordshire. How enormous he still is. The jousting portraits are not flattery. The shoulders filling the bed like a wall, the small mouth, the small furious eyes sunk in the great face, the reddish gold stubble on the jaw glinting in the firelight. 47 years old. 20 stone of him, maybe more. Nobody weighs a king. One tree-trunk leg out from under the coverlet, resting on a folded sheet that was white when the night began. There you are, the king says. 3 words, and you learn everything about the next hour from how they land. There is pain in the voice, which is dangerous, and there is a kind of grim patience over the pain which is survivable. On the bad nights there is neither, only a flat quiet like ice over a river, and on those nights men leave this room with their careers ended and don't know it yet. Your Grace, you say, and you are already kneeling, already setting the kettle down on the hearthstone, and here is where the training lives or dies, not in your words, in your hands. Compton kneels beside you, slowly, and you hear his knees crack, and you hear the breath he cannot quite hide, and you understand that tonight, for the first time, the hands doing the work are going to be yours. The bandage is linen, wound from ankle to knee, and it is soaked through in a patch the size of your palm, and the patch has dried at the edges, which means the cloth has stuck. You pour hot water into the silver basin, the hiss of it, the steam ghosting up between you and the king's face, and you soak a fresh cloth, and you lay it over the stuck bandage, and you hold it there, and you wait. Warmth to soften, never pull dry. Compton taught you this on a bolster stuffed with rags weeks ago, both of you feeling like fools, neither of you laughing. Now the bolster is the leg of the King of England, and the cloth under your fingers is warm and sodden, and the leg beneath it is hot. Hotter than a leg should be. Hot the way Compton's hand was hot on your sleeve, and you can feel the pulse in it, fast, ticking against your fingertips through wet linen, the heartbeat of the kingdom, literally, throbbing in a wound. Wales, the king says, above you. He is not talking to you. He is talking over you to Compton, or to the fire, or to God, because a king in pain must be given something to do with his mind, and what this king does is govern. Norfolk writes that the Welsh marches are quiet. When Norfolk writes that anything is quiet, I count my spoons. A grunt as you begin very slowly to unwind the first turn of the bandage, and the Emperor and the French king have made their peace at last, kissed each other's cheeks like brothers, which means the two greatest princes in Christendom are now at liberty to remember how much they both hate me. You unwind. The linen comes away wet and heavy, folding into your left palm turn after turn, and you keep your movements slow and smooth, the way you would with a horse that might kick, and the smell rises with every turn, blooms in the heat of the room, coats the back of your throat so that you can taste it, and your face is a wall. Your eyes are soft. Your breathing is even through the nose, deliberately through the nose, because Compton told you, the moment you breathe through your mouth, he knows why. The last turn sticks, you wet it again, you wait again. The king talks about the fortifications at Dover, about money, about a Frenchman he does not trust, and his hand. You see it at the edge of your vision. His right hand has gathered a fistful of coverlet and is crushing it, slowly, rhythmically, and that is the only confession the King of England will make tonight. The bandage comes free. You do not look away, and you do not stare. You look at it the way you have taught yourself to look at everything in this room, as work, an opening the length of your little finger, dark at the rim, weeping. The physicians will come at daybreak with their probes and their opinions and their Latin. Your task is only this. Clean linen soaked in warm water, pressed gently, blotted, never rubbed. The dark salve, which smells of vinegar and honey and something metallic, warmed between your own two hands first. You cup the cold ceramic pot in your palms and hold it near the fire, feeling the chill leach out of it into your skin, because cold salve on a raw wound is a cruelty, and this room does not deal in unnecessary cruelties, only necessary ones. Then spread on the fresh bandage, not on the wound. Then the wind-in, ankle upward, firm but not tight. 2 fingers are slack, the cloth passing hand to hand behind the great calf, your knuckles brushing the coarse golden hairs of the king's shin, over and under, the rhythm of it strangely like braiding, strangely like prayer. The king has stopped talking. You tie off the bandage flat against the outside of the leg where it will not press when he walks. You sit back on your heels. Your knees have gone from pain to numbness to a distant ringing. Your hands are shaking very slightly, and you press them flat against your thighs so it will not show. And you feel the heat of your own legs through the hose, and you realize you have sweated clean through your shirt in a room in January. Silence, except the fire. Then the king looks down at you. You feel it before you see it. The attention of him, like standing in a doorway and feeling the draught. And he says, "Compton, this one has hands." That's all. 4 words. Compton bows his head and says something graceful, and the coverlet is drawn back over the leg, and the basin is carried out, and the fouled linen goes into the bag that goes to the laundresses who are paid extra and sworn to silence, and within the half-hour the king is asleep. You hear the breathing change, the great slow tide of it, and you're back on your pallet in the Black Gallery with your heart going like a drum. This one has hands. In Herefordshire, that sentence would mean nothing. Here, it is currency. Here, it will be repeated. Compton will mention it, or the page will, or the walls themselves will, because these walls are made of ears. By dinner tomorrow, 3 men who have never once looked at you will look at you. By supper, one of them will hate you. You lie in the dark, 22 years old, smelling the king's wound on your own fingers. You scrub them in the freezing water of the ewer, and the sweetness is in the crack of your thumb anyway, faint, ineradicable. And you understand fully for the first time the bargain of this place. The closer you kneel to the rot, the higher you rise, and somewhere down the gallery Sir William Compton coughs and muffles it in his sleeve. Morning at court does not arrive. It is assembled. You get perhaps 2 hours more of something like sleep, and then the palace begins to build the day around you, piece by piece, sound by sound. First, the shuffle and cough of the yeoman of the guard changing to watch at the far door, halberd butts knocking softly on stone, a password murmured, always murmured, the words changed every week and worth a flogging to speak aloud. Then the kitchen sounds rising faintly from the courtyards below, 300 servants beginning the daily war of feeding a household of 1,000 souls, the knock of cleavers, the rumble of a cart on cobbles, a man swearing at another man about fish. Then the chapel bell. Then, close and sudden, the gallery around you coming alive. Pallets folded, cloaks shaken, men pissing into the communal pot behind the arras with their eyes still shut. The wet rasp of a whetstone as somebody touches up a knife. And everywhere the small vain morning noises of ambitious men, teeth being scrubbed with cloth and soot, beards combed, ruffs shaken out, a boy holding a candle while a gentleman inspects his own reflection in a polished steel mirror the size of a hand. Because here is what you must understand about the room you serve in, and I need you to understand it properly, because everything else tonight hangs on it. This is not a bedchamber staff. This is the government. The Privy Chamber, the actual physical rooms, the gallery and the closets and the bedchamber, sealed off from the rest of the palace by a locked door and a yeoman with a pole-axe, was invented, more or less, by this king's father, a thin, watchful, frightened man who had won his crown in a muddy field and never afterward trusted anyone he could not see. He built himself a private apartment and staffed it with a handful of men, and made a rule that changed England. No one enters without office. Not dukes, not bishops, not the great officers of state with their white staves and their ancient rites. The public rooms belong to the realm. These rooms belong to the man, which meant that overnight, without a single law being passed, power in England physically moved. It walked out of the council chamber and down the gallery and through that locked door, because power is not parchment. Power is proximity. And the man who hands the king his shirt at 7 in the morning has the king's ear at a moment when no chancellor, no archbishop, no ambassador can reach it. A word dropped while lacing a sleeve outweighs an hour of formal audience. Everyone knows this. Everyone has always known this. The whole architecture of the court, and I mean the literal architecture, the sequence of rooms, guard chamber, presence chamber, privy chamber, bed chamber, each door harder to pass than the last, is a diagram of one single truth. Intimacy is power, and the kingdom is arranged in circles around a body. And at the very centre of those circles, closer than the gentlemen, closer than the physicians, closer than the wives, 6 of them so far, if you're counting from where we stand in 1539, though the king would tell you the count is different, and you would agree with him enthusiastically. At the absolute dead centre, there is the office of the Groom of the Stool. The name means exactly what you fear it means. The stool is the close stool, a padded velvet-covered box, and inside the box a pewter pot, and the king sits on it as kings have always sat on it, because whatever else changes in this world, that does not. The groom of the stool attends him there, prepares the linen, waits, and afterward, with water, with cloth, with his own hands, makes the King of England clean. Now, every instinct you have is telling you this must be the lowest office at court. Some poor wretch, surely, some scullion. Listen to what the office actually carries in this year of 1539, and understand the place you have come to. The groom of the stool is first gentleman of the Privy Chamber, the head of the entire private establishment, commander of every gentleman, groom, usher, and page behind the locked door, including you. He keeps the privy purse, the king's own private money, thousands of pounds a year, spent on the king's word alone, with no clerk of the exchequer counting behind him, the gambling debts, the gifts to ladies, the quiet payments that appear in no public account. He controls the dry stamp of the king's signature. Think about that, a stamp that makes any paper the king's own word. And he sleeps within call of the royal bed, and he knows, before the council knows, before the queen knows, before the king's own confessor knows, whether the king slept, what the king ate, what pained him, what pleased him, what name he muttered, and what his body, that great, sacred, failing, terrifying body, is doing. Because that is the true secret of the office, the reason it sits at the top and not the bottom. In this world, the king's body is not private the way your body is private. The king's body is the state. His health is the currency markets of Antwerp. His digestion is the price of grain. His ulcerated leg is a diplomatic secret worth more than a fortress, because if the courts of France and Spain knew how bad it truly was, how some mornings he cannot walk, how the thing has to be lanced, how the greatest prince in Christendom sweats and swears while two men bind his rotting shin, they would start counting the days to a disputed succession. And disputed successions are how this dynasty was born and how everyone at this court secretly fears it will die. There is one legitimate son. He is 1 year old. He is a heartbeat in a cradle. And between that heartbeat and civil war stands nothing but the health of the body you knelt beside last night. So the man who tends that body at its most helpless is not a servant. He is the keeper of the realm's most dangerous secret. Kings do not give that job to scullions. They give it to men they trust with their lives, which means men of good blood, knights and the sons of knights, men who can also carry a message to an ambassador, or a bribe to a mistress, or a warning to a minister. And because trust from this king is the rarest substance in England, rarer than unicorn horn, of which, by the way, the royal collection claims to own several pieces, the men who receive it become rich, the way land becomes rich when a river changes course. Grants, offices, wardships, licenses, stewardships, leases. Everyone who wants anything from the king learns that the shortest road runs through the man beside the close stool, and everyone pays the toll. The last great groom of the stool died, holding lands in 17 counties, wiping the king, the most wanted job in Tudor England. I told you this place was strange. I did not tell you the half of it. And this morning, in the grey light, the man who holds that office cannot rise from his chair. You see it happen. You are carrying in the king's shirts, warmed, as always, at the fire in the outer closet, because a cold shirt against the royal skin is a failure with consequences, and you have learned to gauge the warmth against the inside of your own wrist like a wet nurse testing milk. And across the Privy Chamber, Sir William Compton sets both hands on the arms of his chair and pushes, and nothing happens. His arms tremble. His face, for 1 second before he rebuilds it, is the naked face of a man alone with a fact. Then Sir Anthony Denny is beside him. Smooth, quiet Denny, second gentleman, a man whose footsteps make no sound and whose opinions make no enemies, taking his elbow as if it were courtesy, as if it were nothing, murmuring something that makes Compton laugh, actually laugh, a terrible wet scrape of a laugh, and the room carries on, and the shirts are carried in, and the day proceeds. But the room saw. You watch the room see. 20 faces, all perfectly composed, and behind every single one of them the same arithmetic beginning. Who rises when he falls? Denny is the obvious heir, senior, trusted, careful. But the obvious heir at this court has a way of being obviously disappointed, because the king enjoys surprising the arithmetic. It reminds everyone that the numbers are his. And there is Sir Thomas Heneage, who held high place before and wants it back, and has the Lord Privy Seal behind him. And there are the young men of the chamber, the gamblers and jousters the king keeps about him like hounds. And there is, at the very bottom of every list, so far down that no one has written it, a 22-year-old from Herefordshire with 4 points tied and a cracked thumb, about whom the King of England said 4 words in the dark. You are not on the list. You keep telling yourself that all morning, while you warm linen and carry wood, and hold the basin for the royal hands, and feel, twice unmistakably, the flick of the king's small blue eyes, finding you across the chamber and moving on. You're not on the list. The trouble with this court is that the list is not yours to stay off of. Let me walk you through what it actually takes to get the King of England out of bed, because you're part of the machine now, and the machine runs every morning of every year, and once you've seen it, you will never again picture power the same way. It begins with fire and water. The bedchamber fire built up while the king still sleeps, a groom moving in stockinged feet, laying the split beech quietly, log by log, each one set down like a sleeping child. Because waking the king before the king wakes is a sin with no name and no forgiveness. The ewers of washing water carried up from the court below, and the water for the king's face and hands is not river water, the Thames being an open sewer with tides, but conduit water brought in lead pipes from springs miles away, one of the quiet marvels of the age that nobody thinks to marvel at, and it is heated and carried and tested, and yes, tested against the wrist again, always the wrist. The whole palace is run on the inside of men's wrists, then the body itself. He wakes badly or well. This morning after the night you had, he wakes better than you feared, which is its own lesson. The leg drains, the pressure eases, the temper eases with it, the mood of a kingdom improved by an ounce of corruption on a linen cloth. He's helped to sit. Helped is a careful word. Nobody hauls the king. Hands are offered, an arm braced here, the great bulk pivoting on the good leg, the bad one swung out with a hiss through the teeth, and you learn to take weight without appearing to take weight, to be furniture with a pulse. He is washed where he sits. Warm water, soft cloth. The face, the neck, the thick freckled forearms. His own hands he washes himself. In the silver basin you hold, and you kneel there with your arms burning at the perfect height, water trembling with the effort of your stillness, while he scrubs his fingers and thinks about France. Then the shirt, the old one, comes off over his head. And there it is again, the body, the sheer alarming acreage of it, the once athlete still visible in the shoulders, like a drowned man visible under ice. And for a moment the most powerful human being in your world is a huge, pale, scarred, middle-aged man with his arms up, and his face muffled in linen, blind and helpless as a child in a smock, and every man in the room has thought the thought, and no man in the room will ever say it. How easy it would be. That thought is treason. Since the Act of 1534, thinking aloud is treason. Words alone without deed can hang you, and men have hanged for words spoken drunk in taverns 100 miles from here. So the thought lives where all the true thoughts of this court live, behind the eyes, in the place your face is built to guard. The warm shirt goes on, then the doublet, and this is where the ceremony thickens, because by now the door has opened and the morning attendance has begun, and the dressing of the king becomes a kind of theatre in which garments are relayed hand to hand in strict order of rank. A groom, you, may fetch the hose and carry them and warm them, but you hand them to a gentleman, and the gentleman presents them, because cloth destined for the royal legs must arrive via hands of sufficient blood. You feel the absurdity of it exactly once, in your first week, and then you stop feeling it, because you watch what happens to a page who hands the king his cap directly. An honest mistake, a helpful boy, and what happens is nothing. Nothing is said. The cap is taken by a gentleman wordlessly, mid-air, redirected through the proper hands, and the boy is gone from the Privy Chamber by Friday, transferred to the stables, his family's investment of years unwound in half a second of helpfulness. Appearances are not decoration here. Appearances are the law, written in velvet, and the clothes themselves. I want you to feel these because your hands do. The hose of fine knitted silk, cool and dry and faintly crackling under your fingers, worth more per pair than a ploughman earns in a year. The doublet stiff with padding and gold embroidery, so heavy with metal thread that carrying it is like carrying a saddle. You hold it and feel the wire of the gold catching the calluses of your palm. The gown over everything furred with sable, and the sable is the softest thing you've ever touched in your life, softer than any woman's hair, a darkness your fingers sink into and lose themselves, 40 skins of a small Russian animal, sewn into a garment so heavy it takes 2 men to hold it open. The king wears it like weather. Under all that magnificence, one leg is bandaged, and the bandage is your work, and when he walks the first steps of the day, you watch him from the wall. Everyone watches, no one is seen to watch. As he tests the leg, decides against the stick that leans by the bed, and turns himself, by pure will, back into Henry VIII. Chest out, beard jutting, the walk rebuilt stride by stride until the limp is a swagger, and by the time the doors open to the Privy Chamber, the man who could not rise in the night is the most alive thing in England. That performance costs him. You know exactly what it costs him. You have begun, without noticing the beginning, to know things about him that his council would pay fortunes for and his enemies would kill for, and every day the knowledge accumulates in you like lead in a cup. Breakfast is bread, ale, meat. He eats prodigiously and always has. The court eats prodigiously behind him, a cascade of leftovers descending rank by rank until the broken meats reach the beggars at the outer gate, so that in a very literal sense several hundred of the London poor are fed each day by whatever the king does not finish. Then the barber, daily, the royal cheeks scraped with a razor you could shave a mouse with, and the barber, by ancient regulation, sworn to keep himself clean and to avoid the company of loose women, lest he bring infection to the royal skin, which tells you everything about how this age thinks disease travels, and everything about how much of court regulation is a wall built around one man's health. Then, chapel, heard privately from the royal closet above, the king following the Latin with a jeweller's attention while simultaneously, audibly, annotating state papers, because this is a man who genuinely believes God is watching him and genuinely believes God will wait. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, every day, at no fixed hour, comes the moment the whole architecture exists to contain. The king rises and says nothing, because he does not need to say anything, and walks to the small door in the corner of the bedchamber, and the groom of the stool follows him in, and the door shuts. The little room is called the stool chamber. Inside it, the close stool itself, a box of oak covered in black velvet, garnished. This is in the accounts. You can read them to this day. With gilt nails and silk fringe, the seat padded with swansdown, because Majesty does not sit on bare wood, a pewter pot within, a shelf with linen, water, a basin, a candle, 2 human beings, and the truth. That is what the little room actually contains, you understand. The truth. It is the only room in England where the king cannot perform. Out there he is God's anointed, the supreme head of the church, the terror of Europe. In here he is a man of 47 with a bad leg and a worse digestion. The physicians fret constantly over the royal bowels. Costiveness in the king is discussed by learned men with the gravity other centuries will reserve for the movement of armies, and they are not wrong to, because his pain is national policy. His constipation ruins ministers' mornings. His relief is felt, genuinely felt, in the tone of documents that govern the lives of 3 million people. And in that room he talks. Every groom of the stool has said so, in the careful language of men who know better than to say it plainly. The king talks on the stool as he talks nowhere else. Ministers' names, complaints, fears even, dressed as complaints. The little room with the velvet box hears the first draft of England. Compton goes in with him this morning. Of course he does. Dying or not, the office is his, and the office is everything he has. And you watch the door shut on the 2 of them, the failing servant and the failing king, each pretending for the other's benefit to be well. And you stand in the bedchamber holding warm linen you may or may not be called to bring, listening to the murmur through the door, one voice mostly, low and continuous, the sound of the most secret conversation in Europe, and you think, with a clarity that frightens you, I want that room. There it is, said at least inside your own head, where the treason laws cannot yet reach. You did not come to court wanting it. You came wanting what every younger son wants, a wage, a name, a chance. But this place teaches you its own appetites the way a river teaches a stone its shape, and standing in the warm bedchamber of Greenwich Palace with lavender-scented Holland over your arm, 22 years old, you have just discovered the exact size and shape of your ambition, and it is a padded box in a small room, and you're ashamed for as long as it takes your heart to beat twice, and then you are not ashamed at all. Behind you quietly, someone says, "Careful." You turn. It is Denny, Sir Anthony Denny, second gentleman, heir apparent to everything you have just coveted, and he is looking at you with the mild, friendly, bottomless attention of a man who misses nothing, and has clearly just watched you stare at that door the way a starving man stares at a bakery. "Careful of what, sir?" you say. "Of your face," Denny says pleasantly. "It was talking." And he moves away across the chamber, noiseless as always, leaving you to stand there and learn the day's great lesson, which is this. You have spent 4 months building a wall of a face to hide disgust. Nobody warned you that the wall would also have to hide wanting. Disgust merely offends kings. Wanting is what gets men killed. That afternoon, Sir William Compton sends for you. Not publicly. A page brings the word, murmured while you are counting candle ends. Everything in this household is counted. Wax, wood, bread, the leavings of every meal, a bureaucracy of crumbs, because a household of 1,000 people leaks money like a holed ship, and the board of green cloth exists to plug every leak with a ledger, and you follow the boy down a back stair to a small closet you've never entered, and there is Compton, sitting by a brazier with a furred gown over his knees like an old man, which he now is, though he was young last summer. The room smells of the brazier's charcoal, a clean, dry, slightly metallic heat, and under it sick-room smells. The herbs they burn to sweeten the air of the dying rosemary and juniper, and under those the thing the herbs are for. "Shut the door," he says. "Sit." Grooms do not sit in the presence of the first gentleman. You sit. That itself is the beginning of the lesson. "You know what is happening to me," he says. Not a question. His voice is careful with breath, spending it like a man counting out his last coins. The physicians say a congestion of the lungs. The physicians say, "I have watched 3 men die of what I have, and I helped bury my own father of it, and I will not see the cherries ripen. We will not waste time being polite about it." You say nothing which is correct, and he nods at the nothing, approving it. "Last night," he says, "you dressed the worst wound in England in the presence of the most dangerous man in Europe, and your hands did not lie, and your face did not speak. Do you know how rare that is? I've watched Knights of the Garter go grey at that bedside. I watched a bishop, a man who anoints the dying for his living, excuse himself to be sick in the gallery, and the king saw him go and said nothing, and that bishop has been waiting 4 years for a preferment that is never, ever coming, and he does not know why. That is how this place kills men, silently years later, of a single moment's honesty." He leans forward. The brazier light moves on his wet forehead. "So I am going to teach you the office," he says, "not because you will get it. You will not get it. Denny will get it, or Heneage, and either will do it well. I am going to teach you because the office must be taught, mouth to ear, the way it was taught to me, and because the men in line for it already think they know it, and men who think they know it are the ones who destroy themselves in the first year. And because," a pause, the counting of breath, "because when the king said this one has hands, that was not a compliment, boy. That was an appointment to something. I don't know what yet. Neither does he. But I have served him for 11 years, and I know how he sounds when he is putting a man in his pocket for later. And so begins your true education, in a charcoal-smelling closet, from a dying man, in sessions of an hour, because an hour is all the breath he has, the syllabus of the strangest job in the world. He teaches you the body first, not medicine. The physicians guard medicine like priests guard the host, but the practical body, the servant's body of the king, which foods bind him and which loosen him, and how to read tomorrow's temper in tonight's supper. When he calls for cheese and cold pie late, expect a black morning. How the leg speaks. The sweet smell sharpening means the wound is closing, which sounds like health, and is the opposite. The fevers come when it closes. You will learn to pray, actually pray, for discharge, and there will be a morning when you catch yourself thanking God on your knees for the successful suppuration of the royal shin, and you will hear yourself, and you will laugh or you will not, and it is better not. How to lift. Never the arm, always under it, your forearm along his, weight taken through your bones and not your grip, because a grip is a claim and no one claims the king. How to be in the stool chamber. Eyes at rest on the middle distance, hands still, ears open, mouth shut, memory working. You will hear things in that room, Compton says, that the Privy Council would maim you to hear. Ministers unmade, marriages weighed. Once, he stops, reconsiders, even dying, even here he reconsiders. Once, things about a queen. You will hear them, and here is the whole art, the entire mystery of the office in one sentence. You must remember everything and know nothing. Remember everything, know nothing. He makes you say it back. He makes you say it back 3 times like a catechism, and you will find yourself murmuring it for the rest of your life, at bedsides and council doors and decades from now, to a young man of your own in some other closet. He teaches you the purse next. The privy purse is a set of leather bags and a book, and the book is written in the groom's own hand, and every penny of the king's private pleasure passes through it. To the keeper of the king's hawks, 40 shillings. To a woman who brought the king puddings, 4 shillings 8 pence. The king loves puddings and rewards them royally. There are years when the pudding woman out-earns scholars. To Domingo, the friar for the king's losses at dominoes, a sum you read twice. Item, lost to the Lady Anne at bowls. Item, to a poor man whose corn the king's horses trampled. Item, 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 the private weather of a king's heart recorded in shillings. Guard the book with your life, Compton says, not because of what is in it, because of what men will imagine is in it. He teaches you the stamp last and lowers his voice to teach it. Though the door is shut and the walls here, he says, are the only honest walls at court. The dry stamp, the king's signature cut in wood, pressed into paper to leave a blind impression, inked in afterward by a clerk's hand, the king's own name in the king's own absence. It exists because the king cannot physically sign the blizzard of paper a modern state produces. Grants, warrants, pardons, payments, hundreds a month, and it is kept locked, and its every use is supposed to be listed and shown to the king monthly, and the men entrusted with it hold, in a very real sense, a piece of the king's soul in a coffer. Understand what you're looking at, Compton says. A block of wood that can pardon a murderer, empty a treasury, or kill a man. Whoever keeps the stamp keeps a piece of God's own pen hand, and it lives in this office, in these rooms, behind that little velvet-covered box you were so careful not to stare at this morning. Yes, I saw you. Everyone saw you. Your face was a proclamation. The stool and the stamp, boy. The body and the signature. That is why the job is wanted. Now you know. And then, because he is Compton, because 11 years beside that body have made him incapable of ending on a grand note, he adds, also, the perquisites are excellent. I hold stewardships in 9 counties, the keeperships of 4 parks, an annuity out of the customs of Bristol, and the right to the king's used night clothes, which are cloth of gold and Holland, and worth more than your father's manor. Men measure honour strangely here. Learn the measurements. He sits back. The hour's breath is spent. You rise, and at the door his voice stops you one last time, and it has changed. The instruction gone out of it. Something older underneath. Merrick, one more thing, and it is the only thing, and if you keep nothing else, keep this. A long pull of air, the lungs bubbling faintly, audibly, like a kettle at the very edge of the boil. He was the most beautiful man in Europe. I saw him at 20, I was the boy holding a stirrup, and I tell you men gasped. He could tire 8 horses in a day's hunting. He wrote music that is still sung, and now his body is failing him, and he is trapped inside it, and he knows. He knows better than any man in England, because he is not a fool. He is the opposite of a fool, exactly what he is becoming, and he cannot say it to anyone ever, because a king's weakness spoken aloud is a spark in a powder mill. So it comes out of him as rage. It comes out as suspicion. It will come out in the years you will serve, and I will not see, as things I do not want to imagine. When it comes, when he turns on you, and he will turn on you, he turns on everyone. The turning is not a possibility, it is the climate. Remember that you're not looking at a tyrant in his triumph. You're looking at the strongest man of his age dying slowly in public on a stage in front of Europe with no one, not wife, not priest, not friend, to whom he is allowed to be afraid. You have hands, the king says. Good. Hands are the start. What this office needs is something rarer. What, sir? You ask. Compton smiles. It is the first true smile you've ever seen on him, and it costs him a coughing fit that bends him double. When he straightens, eyes streaming, the smile is still there. Mercy, he says, buried so deep that not even the king can see it, especially the king. Now get out and send me the boy with the wine. You should see the world you live in, though, because the Privy Chamber is only the innermost box of a nest of boxes, and the nest is one of the wonders of the age. A royal palace in 1539 is not a building. It is a portable city of 1,000 people that happens this season to be parked at Greenwich. The court moves. It must move. And here is the reason nobody puts in the ballads: sewage. 1,000 people, hundreds of horses and drains built for a bishop's household of 80. Within 6 or 8 weeks, any palace the court inhabits becomes, in the frank language of the household ordinances themselves, unsavoury. The very word the regulations use for the deep clean that follows is beautiful. The palace must be sweetened. So the whole apparatus, beds, tapestries, kitchens, chapel plate, the king's own furniture, your straw pallet, is packed onto carts and barges several times a year and floated up or down the Thames to the next great house, Whitehall or Richmond, or the vast new pleasure palace at Hampton Court, while an army of scrubbers descends on the one left behind with lye and rivers of water and shovels, and I do mean shovels. While the court sits, it eats, and the eating is a public work on the scale of a small war. Come down. You go down most days, on errands. From the hushed, waxed, perfumed world of the privy lodgings, down the back stairs, across the cobbled inner court, and into the kitchen offices, and it is like stepping from a chapel into a battle. 50-odd rooms of it. The great kitchen with fireplaces you could stand inside, whole tree trunks burning, and boys turning spits in front of them for hours, faces glazed red, shielded from the blaze by nothing but a wet cloth, and the sheer Tudor conviction that boys are replaceable. The boiling house with its cauldrons big enough to bathe in. The pastry office flowery and comparatively serene, where they raise coffins. That is the real word for a standing pie crust. A coffin, and nobody finds it funny but you. The fish larders reeking of brine and river mud. The spicery locked like a treasury. Because it is one, pepper and cinnamon and saffron worth their weight in silver, weighed out grain by grain under a clerk's eye. 600 people are entitled to eat at the king's cost daily, twice a day, and the ordinances specify every mouthful by rank. So many messes of meat to a duke, so many to a groom like you, down through the yeomen and pages to the scullery children who eat what the rank above them leaves. You're fed, in the accounting of the age, extremely well. beef, mutton, bread, a gallon of ale a day, because ale is food and the water is a gamble. Your body has changed on it in 4 months. Your Herefordshire clothes no longer fit across the shoulders. The ale matters more than you'd think, so let me say it plainly. Nearly everyone at this court, from the king to the spit boys, goes through life very slightly drunk, all day, every day, from breakfast. Small ale is weak, but it is not nothing, and when you multiply not nothing by a gallon by a lifetime, you get a world with a permanent low hum in it. A world of short fuses and easy tears and sudden friendships, and some historians will tell you this explains more about the 16th century than any treaty does. And everywhere, in every court and gallery and doorway of this city-sized machine, there is the thing the machine actually runs on, which is not food and not ale. Precedence. Who walks first? Who stands closer? Who is covered? Hats, I mean. The whole physics of hats. Who may wear one in whose presence, when the king says, "Be covered" to a man, and confers with 2 words a dignity men have schemed years for. Whose hand touches the dish, whose shoulder is touched, who is seen speaking, to whom, in which gallery, for how long. You thought when you arrived that this was vanity. It is not vanity. It is information. There is no press here, no published court circular. The standing of every man is broadcast entirely through these signals, and everyone reads them all day long the way sailors read weather, because your standing decides what you can ask for, and what you can ask for decides what your family is worth. And behind every silk-stockinged man in every gallery there is a family, a whole shire of cousins and creditors, watching his proximity to the king the way farmers watch rain. You write home once a month. Your father's replies come back weeks later, smelling of the damp of the muniment chest, full of hedge disputes and your mother's rheumatism, and one sentence, always, in every letter, the sentence he cannot help. It is said Sir William ails. Is there anything in it? Even in Herefordshire. Even your father, a man who has met one night in his life, is tracking the health of the groom of the Stool, because the entire kingdom, all 3 million souls of it, is organised as a single vast antenna pointed at the body of one man and the bodies of the few men around him. Nothing in your world is private. Privacy has not been invented. It is being invented, in fact, right now, in those locked rooms you serve. The Privy Chamber is one of the places where the very idea of a private life is being hammered out by a king who wants to be alone and can never, not once, not for an hour in his entire life from font to grave, actually be alone. Think about that tonight. You who are listening to this in a room by yourself, a luxury no Tudor king ever knew. He is never alone. Someone watches him sleep. Someone attends him on the stool. Someone tests his shirt against their wrist. When he prays privately, a gentleman kneels within call. The most powerful man in the world lives with less solitude than a monk, less than a prisoner, and the men who provide that eternal company, who are that eternal company, are paid for it in the only coin that matters here: closeness. The whole economy in one word. An ambassador, the French one, Marillac, a clever, exhausted man, will write home this very year trying to explain to Paris why he cultivates the gentlemen of the Privy Chamber above half the council, and the explanation is the plainest sentence in the diplomatic bag. They are about the king's person. That is the entire analysis. About the person, near the body. Everything else, titles, offices, ancient blood, is commentary. You learn to move through this world the way you learn to move through the bedchamber. Smoothly, quiet, seen exactly as much as is useful. You learn the geography of danger, that the open galleries are safer than the window bays, because a window bay is where men draw you for a private word, and a private word with the wrong man in the wrong week can end you. That the chapel is full of eyes, that the tilt yard and the tennis player where the young bloods measure each other, and where a groom does well to admire loudly and bet small. You learn names the way a sailor learns stars. My Lord Privy Seal, Thomas Cromwell, the blacksmith's son from Putney who runs England from a house full of clerks, whose men are everywhere, whose memory forgets nothing, who this very winter is arranging the king a fourth marriage to a German duke's sister he has never seen on the strength of a painting. Remember that, the painting. We will come back to the painting. All England is going to come back to the painting. The Duke of Norfolk, dry and ancient and hard as a flint axe, who hates Cromwell with a patience that is almost religious. The young men, the Culpepers and Seymours, glittering and hungry. And through them all, around them all, the quiet men of the chamber, Denny and Heneage and the rest, saying little, hearing everything, holding basins. At the end of January, the court sweetens Greenwich and moves upriver to Whitehall, and you make the journey the way the household makes it, by barge, in the bitter grey morning, sitting on a crate of the king's plate with your breath smoking and the tide running hard, past the marshes and the windmills and then the city rising on the right bank, London, the roar and reek of it reaching you across the water, church towers beyond counting, the bridge downstream with its houses and its traitors' heads on poles, so far away they look like pinheads, and you are glad they are far away, and you do not know yet, sitting on your crate in the cold, how close by summer heads on poles are going to feel. Compton does not travel with the household. He goes by easy stages, by litter wrapped in furs, and he arrives at Whitehall 4 days late looking like his own effigy. And the king, this is the thing about the king that no one who hasn't stood in these rooms will ever quite believe. The king, who will sign death warrants before breakfast without blinking, goes down the gallery to meet the litter himself, and takes Compton's hand in front of 40 people, and calls him my old friend, in a voice that is not performing anything, and orders him lodged in rooms near his own, with a fire day and night at the king's own cost. And then, that same evening, in the Stool chamber with the door shut, you know because you're on the outer door, and the murmur carries, not the words, just the shape of the words. The king asks Compton at last directly, the question the whole court has been asking for a month, and whatever Compton answers, the door opens 20 minutes later, and the king comes out with his face perfectly composed, and behind the composure is something you have never seen on him before, and will spend years learning the taste of: fear. Plain human fear, in the eyes of the man who owns everything. His oldest servant is dying, his own leg is rotting, his son is an infant, his kingdom is excommunicate. The two great powers of Europe have just made friends over his head, and the body that holds the whole world together aches every single morning. Merrick, he says, passing you at the door, not stopping, not looking. The hands. Tomorrow you attend within. Within. One word. Inside the small room. Behind the last door. At the centre of the world. You bow. Your face is a wall. Behind the wall, everything in you is falling upward at once. You do not sleep that night, and the not sleeping is its own strange country. You lie on your pallet at Whitehall, a different gallery, a different draught, the same 3 inches of straw, and you rehearse, in the dark, a task that cannot be rehearsed, and you keep arriving at the same absurd, enormous fact. Tomorrow morning you will kneel beside the King of England while he relieves himself, and you must be perfect, and no one on earth can tell you what perfect is. Compton can a little. He receives you before dawn, propped on pillows, and gives you the last lesson in 6 sentences, because 6 sentences of breath is what he has at this hour. Enter behind him, never before. Linen over your left forearm, water on the shelf, warm, tested. Stand where he placed the mark. There is a mark, a worn patch on the floorboards where 11 years of one man's feet have stood, and the intimacy of that detail nearly undoes you. Do not watch him, and do not avoid watching him. Rest your eyes. If he speaks, answer short and true. And when it is time, you will know. He will shift his weight. There is a way he shifts his weight. You go to one knee, and you do the thing with warm water and soft linen gently, thoroughly, the way you would for a wounded man you loved, and you make it neither long nor short, and you never at any moment by any muscle of your face acknowledge that anything in the room is other than ordinary. Because that is the gift, boy, Compton whispers. That is what the office actually sells. Not clean linen, ordinariness. For a quarter of an hour a day, that room is the one place in creation where the king is allowed to be a body like other bodies, where the terrible machinery of majesty stops, and your whole art is to make the stopping safe. The groom of the stool does not serve the king's arse. Any fool could. He serves the king's permission to be human. Guard it. It is the most fragile thing in England. And so, at mid-morning, after the washing and the shirt and the small ceremonies, you now know like your own heartbeat. The king rises from his chair, and his eyes find you across the bedchamber, a flick, a summons with no words in it. And the small door opens, and you go in behind him, and the door shuts, and the sound of the latch is the loudest sound you've ever heard. The room is smaller than you imagined and warmer. A charcoal brazier. One candle, though it is day, because the window is high and small and glazed thick for privacy, and the light through it is the colour of weak cider. The velvet of the close stool is black and shows the wear of hands at its edges, the nap rubbed to a shine in 2 places exactly where a man's palms would press to lower himself, and there is something about those 2 shiny patches. The sheer humanity of them, the years of them, that steadies you more than all of Compton's sentences. The king settles himself with a grunt, robes arranged, the bad leg extended carefully with the heel dug into the rushes, and for a moment there is nothing in the world but the brazier ticking and the far-off bray of a boatman on the river, and you stand on the worn patch of floor with linen over your left arm and your eyes resting on the middle distance, and your heart going so hard you're certain the sound of it is filling the room like a drum. And then the King of England sighs, a long, descending, wholly unroyal sigh, the sigh of a heavy man in a warm room, and says conversationally to the wall, "My Lord Privy Seal wishes me to marry a woman I have never seen, on the word of a painter." You say nothing. Short and true, Compton said, and the truest thing available is silence, and the silence seems to be right, because the king goes on, in the tone of a man picking at a knot. Cleves. A duchy on the Rhine, the size of a kitchen garden, and its friendship worth having only because everyone greater has made friends against me. Master Holbein rode out and painted the Duke's sister, and the painting is come home, and the painting is fair enough. Paintings are always fair enough. That is what paintings are for. A shift. The velvet creaks. Cromwell says her beauty excels the Duchess of Milan's, as the golden sun excels the silver moon. Cromwell has not seen her either. Cromwell would tell me a turnip excelled the moon if the alliance required it, and the worst of it, boy, is that he might be right to. That is what none of them understand. The young men who think I do as I please. I have pleased myself in marriage twice. The words come out flat one after another, like coins counted onto a table. Twice, and the realm is still paying for both. And there it is. Your first morning inside the last door, and the king has just handed you, casually over his shoulder, into the cider-coloured light, his entire hand of cards, that he does not want the German marriage, that he distrusts the painting, that he is being managed by his own minister and knows it, and beneath all of it, in that flat counting voice, the thing that will never be said in any other room, the ash of Anne Boleyn's name lying invisible on every surface. Remember everything, know nothing. Well, the king says, the realm must have friends, and a king must have sons. One son is a candle in a draught. He looks at you then, for the first time in the little room, the small blue eyes narrowed, half humorous, wholly unreadable. You are from the Marches, Hereford, Merrick. Your grandfather held the bridge at, where was it, against the Welsh in my grandfather's day. He knows. Of course he knows. This is the other thing about him that the ballads get wrong. They make him an appetite in a crown, and forget that inside the appetite is one of the best furnished minds in Europe. 6 languages, theology enough to argue archbishops into corners, and a memory for men, for the details of men, their fathers, their bridges. That is itself an instrument of rule, because a king who remembers your grandfather owns a piece of you forever, and knows it, and spends it, and is spending it on you right now, and knowing all this does not stop it working. You feel it work. Warmth, absurd, grateful warmth, spreading through your chest at the fact that the man on the velvet box knows about the bridge. Ludford, your grace, you say. Though my grandfather claimed the Welsh were mostly his cousins, and the holding of the bridge was mostly an argument about sheep. A silence, one heartbeat long, in which you die. Then the king laughs. Not the public laugh, the great hall laugh that 40 men lean toward like plants toward a window. A short private bark, surprised out of him, and he shakes his head and says, mostly an argument about sheep. So is Christendom, boy. So is Christendom. And he is still amused somewhere behind the beard when the moment comes. The shift of weight Compton promised, unmistakable when it happens, a settling and a straightening at once. And you go to one knee on the rushes, and the smell of the king is around you, and your hands do the office. I will not walk you through it, and not because your ears are delicate, because the truth of the moment is not in the details your imagination is reaching for. The truth is this: it is work, like other work. Warm water wrung from linen, the ringing loud in the quiet, water running over your wrist. Gentleness as a discipline, gentleness performed by the muscles of the hands regardless of what the heart is doing, which is, as it happens, hammering out one continuous soundless prayer. The heat of a human body close to your face, the fine cloth, then the dry cloth. Thoroughness without lingering, briskness without haste, that narrow channel between insult and intrusion which is the whole art, and which your hands find. They find it. They had it in them all along. All those months of warming linen against your wrist were teaching your hands this exact judgment. And it is done, and the robes fall, and you are on your feet with the used linen already folded inward on itself and out of sight, because the last office of the groom is to make the evidence vanish, to restore the room to a room where nothing happens. The king stands, adjusts, looks down at you from his full height, 20 stone of Christendom's argument about sheep, and says nothing at all about what has just occurred, because nothing has just occurred. That is the fiction, and the fiction is the service. What he says is, Compton taught you. Yes, your grace. He taught you well. A pause, the candle fidgets, and then quietly, in a voice with no crown in it whatsoever. He is the last of them, you know, of the men who knew me young, Brandon and him and 2 or 3 ghosts. Every year the number of people in the world who remember me at 20 grows smaller, and when they are gone, there will be no one living who ever saw me run. He is not talking to you. You understand that with total clarity. He is talking to the room, to the one room where talking is possible, and you happen to be the room's furniture, and the furniture's task is to receive it and hold it and know nothing. God keep Sir William, you say. Short, true. He won't, the king says, and opens the door himself and walks out into the bedchamber, and by the second stride the limp has been rebuilt into the swagger, and the gentlemen turn toward him like a field of grain in wind, and the machinery of majesty takes him back. You stand in the little room for the space of 3 breaths, alone as anyone ever is at court, with the brazier ticking and the folded linen in your hand and the whole morning ringing in you like a struck bell. You wanted the room, now you have been inside it, and the terrible thing, the thing you could never explain in a letter home, is that it is better than you wanted, and worse, because you thought the prize was power. The purse, the stamp, the leases in 9 counties, and the purse and the stamp are real. But what actually lives behind the last door, what the velvet box actually seats you beside, is a lonely, brilliant, frightened, dangerous man dissolving inside his own legend, and the office is not to rule him and not to rob him, whatever the courtiers believe. The office is to hold the door of the one small room where the King of England is allowed to be mortal. And God help you, kneeling on the rushes with your heart still thundering, you're good at it. Sir William Compton dies on a Tuesday in Lent, an hour before dawn, in the rooms the king gave him, with a fire burning at the king's cost. You are there, not by right, by his own word sent for at midnight by the same boy Rafe, who is crying and trying not to be, and you sit through the last hours in the corner of the room with the physician and the priest and Compton's steward, and you learn what dying actually sounds like in this age, which is mostly breathing, the long tearing tidal labour of it, worse than any of the sounds you have guarded your face against, and no wall of a face is asked of you here, and that is somehow the hardest part, having permission. Twice he surfaces. The first time he asks whether the king slept, and the steward says yes, and he nods as if a report has been satisfactorily filed, 11 years of habit outliving the lungs themselves. The second time, very near the end, his eyes find you in the corner. They are the only quick thing left in him, and he says in a voice like paper sliding on paper, "Mercy, buried deep, say it." Mercy, buried deep, you say. Deeper, says Sir William Compton, and does not speak again, and the breathing goes on another hour without him, and then it stops, and the room is so quiet you can hear the fire eating the wood, and the priest begins the prayers, and outside the window the first carts are rumbling into the palace yards, because the court's day is assembling itself exactly as always. 600 breakfasts, the machine that stops for nothing, and now you know for certain you had suspected that it will not stop for you either, ever, and there is a cold comfort in it, like the cold of deep water. The king is told at his waking. You're in the bedchamber when Denny tells him, Denny's voice pitched perfectly, grave without drama, and you watch the news land on the great face, and here is what happens. Nothing happens. The face receives it like a door receiving a knock. He continues to be washed. He is silent through the shirt, silent through the doublet, and the room around him goes silent too, 40 men breathing carefully. And the only sign in the world that the King of England has lost the last of the men who saw him run is that when the barber approaches, he lifts one hand, a small flat gesture. No, and goes unshaved that day, a thing you have never seen. And at the chapel closet he stays half an hour beyond the office, alone with his God and his ledger of griefs. And that evening the privy purse book, in a new hand, records money to the priests of 3 churches for masses for the soul of Sir William Compton. Night. And that is the whole of the royal mourning that any eye will ever see. But you attend within that morning in the little room, and in the little room on the velvet box the king weeps. Not long, not loudly. A big man's weeping, nearly motionless, the tears simply leaving his eyes and going down into the beard while he stares at the candle, and his voice when it comes is level and terrifying and infinitely tired. They go out one by one like lights down a lane, and every man they leave behind me loves me for what I can give him, every single one. That is the estate of kings, boy, to be loved down to the exact penny of one's usefulness, and not 1 farthing further. And then, this is the part you will never tell anyone, not your wife decades hence, not the priest at your own deathbed. The King of England looks at you, red-eyed, unshaven, enormous, and says, except, possibly, the dead. Compton had nothing left to gain from me. Nothing. He knew it a month ago, and still, every night, he asked whether I slept. The candle flame bends and recovers. Explain that to me. You cannot. No one could. You stand on the worn patch of floor and say the only short true thing in you. He was your man, sir. It was not for wages by the end. The silence that follows is very long, and you spend all of it certain you have destroyed yourself. And then the king exhales through his nose, half a laugh with no joy in it, and says, from the marches, and honest, God help you at this court, boy, and holds out his hand for the linen, and the day resumes. The office falls vacant, and the court, which has been circling the vacancy for 2 months, drops on it like gulls on a tide line. You would not believe... No, you would. By now you will believe anything. The traffic of that fortnight. Denny is favourite, and Denny's window bay is suddenly the busiest square yard in England, men drifting toward him with the elaborate casualness of cats, gifts arriving at his lodging, a gelding, a case of pipercrass, a psalter with jewelled clasps, all of it accepted with beautiful vagueness. Heneage's people put it about that Denny is too deep in Cromwell's purse, which he is. Denny's people put it about that Henage is old and his hands shake, which they do. The Duke of Norfolk, who wants his own creature near the royal body for reasons everyone can name and no one says, invites to supper twice. A startled young groom of the chamber called Thomas Merrick, and you go. Refusing a duke is not among your options. And you sit at his table under the flat lizard gaze of the premier peer of England while he asks lightly, between the fish and the fowl, what humour the king was in on Tuesday, whether his grace had spoken of the German marriage, whether the leg, and hear the old man's voice go soft as ash. Whether the leg mends, remember everything, know nothing. I am only a groom, my lord, you say. I carry wood and warm linen. The gentleman would know. I only kneel and fetch. Norfolk looks at you for a long moment, the way a man looks at a coin he suspects, and then smiles with the front of his face and says that humility is a great treasure in a young man, and the supper ends early, and walking back through the dark courts with the link boy's torch throwing your shadow enormous on the walls, you understand that you have just made your first great enemy, and that he is the third man in England, and that the alternative, answering him, would have been worse, and that this is what the middle of your life is going to feel like. A corridor of doors, every one of them wrong. In the end, the king does what Compton predicted and the court did not. He divides the spoils and surprises the arithmetic. Denny gets the substance. Chief place at the body, keeping of the Whitehall Palace, the dry stamp in his charge within a few years, effectively first man of the chamber. Heneage gets the name and the honour of the ancient office the title men bow to. The purse, the leases, the keeperships are dealt round like cards, every faction fed just enough to stay hungry. And at the very end of the list, in the warrant's plain clerk hand, one line that changes your family's history forever: Thomas Merrick, gentleman, to be a gentleman of the Privy Chamber, with attendance upon the King's Majesty's person, and the wage thereof. Gentleman, not groom. Through the last door, not by favour of the day, but by patent in ink under the stamp. Your father will read the letter in Herefordshire, and walk out and stand in the orchard for an hour in the rain, and your mother will watch him from the window and let him stand. Denny finds you in the gallery the evening the warrant is read. He congratulates you, and it costs him nothing, because nothing about you threatens him yet, and Denny is precise about the word yet, in a way that has kept him alive for 15 years. A word of counsel, Master Merrick, he says, in that voice like a hand smoothing a bed. You rose because a dying man taught you and a grieving king remembered you. Those are honest reasons, and honest reasons are the most dangerous kind, because they cannot be repeated on purpose. Every other man behind that door rose by faction, and faction can be repeated. It can be fed, watered, defended. You belong to no one. At this court, a man who belongs to no one is a purse lying open on a table. Then who should I be, sir, you ask? Denny smiles his mild, bottomless smile. Ah, he says, that is the question the next 2 years will ask you. My counsel is only this: when they ask it with knives out, and they will, the year is coming, I can smell it the way sailors smell weather. Be standing near the linen, not near the great men. Great men fall, linen endures. He glides away down the gallery, noiseless, and you stand there among the tapestries. Abraham, 10 feet tall in wool and gold thread, forever offering up his son. And you do not know yet that the year Denny smells is 1540, and that before it is out you will watch the second man in the kingdom go down like a tower and stand close enough to feel the wind of it. The painting arrives before the woman does, and the woman arrives in the worst January anyone can remember. You have to understand the scale of what is coming, because this is the great public spectacle of your court years. Not a hanging, nothing so cheap. This is the marriage of England, performed as theatre in front of the world, and the world has been invited specifically so that 2 hostile emperors will read the reviews. Anne, sister of the Duke of Cleves, has been travelling for a month. Dusseldorf to Antwerp to Calais, where storms pin her for a fortnight, while the English garrison teaches her card games to pass the time. a detail you love when you hear it and love more later, when you understand it was the happiest fortnight she would get, and then across a grey heaving channel to Deal, and up through Canterbury and Rochester toward London, through crowds turned out in the frost to see their new queen, and every mile of it choreographed by my Lord Privy Seal, who has staked, though only he knows the full arithmetic of this, his policy, his credit, and as it will turn out his neck on the woman in the litter. And you already know something the crowds do not. You know it from the little room, because the king went to see her. Privately, that is the story. Nothing this king does is private, but this was the fiction. He rode to Rochester on New Year's Day with a handful of gentlemen, disguised, carrying a gift of furs, meaning to surprise his bride, because that is the game of kings, the old chivalric game. The lover comes unknown. The lady's heart knows him anyway. Love leaps the disguise. He has played it all his life. He walked in on her while she was watching a bull baiting from a window, this travel-stunned German woman who'd been told nothing of the game, who didn't know the huge stranger embracing her was the King of England, and who, reasonably sensibly, catastrophically, was polite and startled and turned back to the window. She failed to recognize him. That is all, in any sane world. A nothing. In this world, in front of his gentlemen, the ageing king stood unrecognized, unloved at first sight. Just a fat old man in a plain cloak whom a young woman looked past. And something in him died of shame on the spot and turned, as everything in him turns now, to rage. He went out, put on his purple, came back, was received with all correctness. And riding home he said the sentence to his gentleman that you heard him say again, flat and cold, on the velvet box the next morning, and that all England will hear whispered within the month. I like her not. 3 words. Remember the arithmetic of 3 words at this court. Marillac. The ambassador is paid to catch sentences like that. Cromwell would give a year of his life to unsay it, and you, standing on the worn patch of floor with linen over your arm, receive it for the little room's archive and file it where everything is filed. Remember everything, know nothing, but the machine cannot stop. The treaty is signed, the lady is landed, the Germans are watching, the French are watching, and so on the 3rd of January comes the official reception, the show itself, on the open heath at Blackheath below Greenwich, and the whole court goes down the river to perform the greatest pageant of the reign, and because the king's leg must be dressed before he arms and robes, you are of the riding household that day, and you see it, all of it, and I want you to see it too. Blackheath, black with people. They have been arriving since before light. Londoners streaming out over the bridge and through Southwark in their thousands, frost smoking off the grass as the sun comes up, the heath a plain of breath. Rails have been set to hold the crowds. Tents of cloth of gold stand near the park gate, warmed with braziers, scented, you get near enough to smell them, with juniper smoke and perfume against the cold. The merchants of the city are drawn up in velvet on one side, the German merchants of the Steelyard on another, the aldermen, the bishops, the judges, the whole realm, sorted and displayed by rank, across a frozen common, 5,000 horsemen when the counts are made, harness ringing in the cold air like a city of small bells. And at noon, guns, the Tower guns first, far off down the river, a rolling grumble like summer thunder in the wrong season, and then nearer batteries answering. And through the park gate comes the king. You have dressed the ruin under the splendour with your own hands that very morning. You know exactly to the inch what the cloth of gold is covering. And still, when he comes out of the park on the great horse, your breath goes. That is his last magic, and he spends it without stint. Purple and cloth of gold, diamonds in his bonnet, collar of pearls the size of thumbnails, the horse trapped in goldsmith's work, and the bulk that shames him in a shirt becomes, in the saddle, in the metal light of January, majesty itself, a moving sun, and 5,000 horse and half of London roar at the sight of him, and the roar rolls around the heath like the guns come back, and beside you a Kentish farm wife is weeping into her apron with pure joy at the glory of England, and you look at her face and understand something enormous. The performance works. It works on everyone it is meant for. You are one of perhaps 30 living souls on whom it can never work again, and that is the true price of the little room, paid daily, forever. You have seen the leg. You cannot unsee the leg. They cheer the sun, and you love him more than they do, and pity him more than they do. And pity for a king is the most dangerous cargo a man can carry. So you stow it deep where Compton told you deeper. Then she comes out to meet him from her tent of gold, and the two processions flow together on the frozen heath. Trumpets, the crash of the guns again, the two of them embracing on horseback before the realm, all smiles, all grace, the show of a love neither feels performed faultlessly by two strangers for an audience of emperors. And it is beautiful. It is genuinely one of the most beautiful things you will ever see, and it is a lie from edge to edge, and you stand in the freezing wind knowing the lie, one of the few on the field who knows, feeling the knowledge sit in your chest like a swallowed stone. They are married 3 days later. In the little room, the morning after the wedding night, the king says nothing at all, which is the loudest he has ever said anything. And then, on the second morning, staring at the candle, he says it. The sentence the divorce lawyers will make half of England repeat under oath by summer. The sentence you receive standing utterly still. That matters stand between them as they stood before. A marriage of the realm, unconsummated in the flesh. A queen who is not a wife. A minister who built his tower on this marriage now standing on air. And you do the office. Warm water, soft linen. You make the room ordinary because ordinary is the gift, and never once. This is your work now, this is the whole of it. Never once does your face confess that you're holding, in your two hands, along with the linen, the exact fault line along which the government of England is about to break. That evening, needing air the way a diver needs it, you climb. There is a way up onto the leads of the palace roof. The plumbers and the fire watch use it, and a gentleman who tips the right yeoman can use it too. A black spiral stair, then a low door, then suddenly the sky, and all of Greenwich and the river and the world laid out below you in the last light. You stand between the chimney stacks with the wind pulling at your gown, the lead-ridged and frost-slick underfoot, gulls sliding past below you, actually below you, and you look westward. The river runs an unlikely goal toward London. The bridge, the wharves, the crowd of masts thick as reeds off the pool, ships that were in Danzig and Bordeaux and Seville within the season, the whole restless money of the world nosing up the tide. Downstream, the flats and marshes going blue with evening, the royal dockyards where they're building the new great ships, hammers still faintly going in the dusk. Below you, the palace itself, smoke rising from 60 chimneys, the chapel windows kindling one by one as the candles are lit, the courtyards crawling with the tiny confident figures of the 1,000 people who feed and guard and adorn one man. And somewhere directly beneath your boot soles, under lead and timber and gilded ceiling, that one man is sitting by his fire with his bad leg on a stool, trapped in a marriage he cannot want and cannot yet escape, ruling all of it, the ships, the smoke, the gold river, the weeping farm wife gone home to Kent, from inside a body that hurts. From up here the machine looks eternal, stone and river and law, built to outlast the mountains. It is not eternal. It is one heartbeat old, every second. That is the secret you keep now, the secret of the little room carried up onto the roof of the world. Everything you can see from this parapet, every mast, every chimney, every life, is balanced on the health of one ulcerated leg and the moods of one grieving giant. And nobody down there in the beautiful smoking twilight will let themselves know it. You stand until the light is gone, and the frost finds your bones, and the watch calls below. Then you go back down the black stair, into the warmth and the wax light and the endless watched galleries, to your work, which is linen, which endures. The crisis, when it comes the way Compton said everything comes at this court, silently, at night through the body. It is late spring. The court is at Westminster. The marriage question is grinding through the lawyers like a millstone through wet grain. Cromwell has, astonishingly, this is the deep strangeness of that season, just been made Earl of Essex, raised higher than ever at the exact moment the ground is opening under him, because this king gilds men the way farmers fatten geese, and half the court cannot decide whether the earldom is a shield or a garnish. The air of the palace that month has a taste you will remember all your life, a thundery pre-storm taste. Men speak in doorways with their voices lower than usual. The Duke of Norfolk has begun to smile, which frightens everyone. And then, on an ordinary Thursday, the leg closes. You know the signs by now better than the physicians do, because the physicians visit and you live here. 3 days of the wound drying, which His Grace, in his eternal war with his own flesh, insists on calling healing. And woe to the man who frowns at the word. Then the ankles swelling above the bandage, the skin going tight and shiny like a sausage on a fire. Then the colour climbing into his face, and the temper climbing with it. A page reduced to tears over a mislaid glove, a secretary's draft torn across. The council kept standing for 2 hours, the whole chamber walking as if the floor were eggs. Then, Thursday night, the fever. You're within call, because you're always within call now. It is your week of the pallet by the door. And sometime in the black hours you wake, not to a groan, and not to your name, but to a sound that is worse than both. And it takes you a moment, sitting up in the dark with your heart already sprinting to name it. Breathing. Loud, wrong breathing through the great door. Fast and shallow with a catch in it. The breathing of a man in trouble. Inside, the fire shows you everything at once. The king is half sitting against the bolsters, and his face is the colour of the darkened old wax at the base of a candle, grey with a dreadful blue flush over the cheekbones, and it is streaming, the pillow black with sweat in the firelight, and his is when they find you are the most frightening thing you have seen in 3 years at court, because they are frightened. The gentleman of the night watch, young Herbert, is standing frozen at the bed's foot with a cup in his hand like a man in a mask playing fear. The words are the leg, and they are slurred, and the great right hand is plucking, an old man's gesture, a dying man's gesture. You've seen it once before, in a firelit room in Lent, at the coverlet over the shin. What is happening inside the king, though no one in this century has the words for it, is this. The ulcer that drains the poisons of that vast body is sealed, and the poison has gone looking for somewhere else to be, and it has found the blood, and it may kill him tonight. Men in this age would say his humours are stopped. Say it however you like. 2 years ago, before your time, the same thing happened. The fistula closed. The king went black in the face and speechless, and for 10 days the realm stood at the edge of the pit while 3 physicians and God argued over the body. And every man now sleeping in this palace who lived through that fortnight still dreams about it. And here is the arithmetic of this exact moment, which you do in the time it takes to cross the room, because the little room has taught you to do arithmetic at the speed of fear. The physicians must be fetched. Dr. Butts lodges across 2 courtyards, chambers further. That is minutes. If it is known that they were fetched, if the palace sees running men and lit windows at 3 in the morning, by noon the ambassadors' couriers are on the Dover Road, and by next month every court in Europe is pricing English trouble, with a 1-year-old heir and a succession like dry tinder. If the king dies tonight, every man in this room will spend the rest of his life being asked what he did in what order, by men holding warrants. And if the king lives, kings remember the faces they saw when they were afraid. He will remember whatever you do in the next 60 seconds for as long as he breathes. Compton's voice, in your skull, dry as paper. Whatever you see. Your face is a wall. Kings forgive theft sooner than disgust. And sooner than disgust, boy. They forgive anything sooner than they forgive witness terror. So this is what you do, and you will go over it 10,000 times in the years after, and change nothing. You make your face calm. Not blank, calm, which is a different and harder wall. Blankness reads as horror at this range. You say, the wound has sealed, your grace. It wants opening. This has been mastered before and will be mastered now, in the voice you would use to say the barge is ready. And you watch a single degree of the terror go out of his eyes, because the room has told him it is ordinary, and ordinary is the gift. Ordinary is the entire office, and never in your life has the gift cost so much to give. Then, without ever once appearing to hurry, you hurry. Herbert is sent for Butts. Walk in, you tell him. Walk fast, but walk. Wake no one you do not need. Bring him by the privy stair. Rafe, grown now, steady, thank God for Rafe. To the page's fire for water. The same murmured errand as 3 years ago in Greenwich. The machine of the night assembling itself round the body one more time. You build the fire because warmth loosens what cold binds, this age believes, and whether the age is right hardly matters. The blaze is something to look at that is not the king's face. You get the coverlet back and the bandage off. The shin is a horror, taut and hot and shining. The skin around the sealed wound gone a deep angry colour with red threads climbing from it toward the knee, like something written in an alphabet you refuse to read. And you bathe it with hot cloths, as hot as your own hands can wring, hotter, your fingers scalding and going numb and scalding again, wring and lay, drawing the heat of the blood toward the surface, and all the time you talk. That is the strangest part. The part Herbert will speak of afterward in the covered voice men use for things they don't understand. You talk, low and level and continuous, the way your grandfather's horsemen talk to a colt with a torn leg, the bridge at Ludford of all things, and the sheep, and the Welsh cousins, and Hereford apples, the cider orchards in blossom this very week, whole hillsides going white above the Wye. Nothing, a river of warm nothing, and the King of England lies in the sweat-black bed with his eyes shut, gripping your left wrist with his right hand hard enough to leave a bracelet of bruise you will wear for a fortnight, and listens to a young man describe apple blossom until the physicians come. Butts arrives with his box and his gravity, blinks once at the leg, once at you. A long, flat, professional blink you will only understand later, and does what must be done. I will spare you the instrument. The age does not have the mercy of sparing the king. It is quick, and it is dreadful, and two of you hold the leg, and the king makes one sound through his teeth like timber taking strain, and then makes no more sounds at all, because even here, even now, drenched and grey at 4 a.m. with a knife at his shin, he is performing for the room. And the wound opens, and the corruption comes away, shocking in quantity, and within the half-hour the change begins, visible, unmistakable, the tight skin easing, the breathing lengthening, the grey ebbing from the face like a tide going out, and near dawn the King of England falls asleep mid-sentence, his hand still loosely around your wrist, and Dr. Butts looks at you across the wreckage of the bed, the basins, the crimson linen, the reek, and says quietly, 4 words of his own, "Who taught you this?" "Sir William Compton," you say. Butts nods slowly. "Yes," he says, "it has his hand. Sit down before you fall down, Master Merrick. The realm can spare you a stool." You do not remember sitting. You remember the light coming up grey and then gold in the tall windows, and the reeking linen going out in bags to the sworn laundresses, and the room being rebuilt around the sleeping giant into a room where nothing happens, the fiction, the service. And you remember your own hands when you finally look at them, scalded lobster red to the wrist, shaking now that shaking is allowed, the crack at your thumbnail split wide, and stinging with a pain that feels that morning almost companionable. And you remember that when the king woke at noon, weak and clear-eyed and alive, the first thing he asked for was food, and the second thing he asked for was you. And when you came to the bedside, he looked at you for a long moment with those small blue unreadable eyes, and said nothing about the night at all. Ever, then or afterward, not one word for the rest of his life. And made you keeper of one of his parks, and granted you the lease of 2 good manors on the Welsh marches within a month, in documents that gave, as the reason for the king's grace, the customary formula, the beautiful, bottomless, utterly Tudor formula, for his true and faithful service, done unto us in sundry wise. 60 years from now, a grandchild will ask you what service, and you will look into the fire and say it was mostly an argument about sheep, and the child will not believe you, and you will let it stand. And then, in June, the year Denny smelt arrives on schedule, and you learn the last lesson of the court, the one that no one teaches because everyone is too busy surviving it. What happens to the men who stand closest when the weather turns? It happens on the 10th of June, a Saturday at 3 in the afternoon at the council table at Westminster, and you are not in the room. No one of the chamber is, but the palace knows within minutes, the way a body knows a wound before the pain arrives. Doors. That is what you remember. The sound of doors, all down the galleries, opening and shutting faster than doors usually do, and men walking faster than men usually walk while trying to look as if they aren't. And then Rafe, white-faced at your elbow in the gallery, whispering the impossible sentence. "They've taken my Lord of Essex." At the council board, the captain of the guard came in and took him. Thomas Cromwell, Earl of Essex of 8 weeks' standing, Lord Privy Seal, vicegerent of the king in matters spiritual, the blacksmith's son who ran England for a decade, who broke the monasteries and rebuilt the state and made the king head of his own church, arrested at the council table by his colleagues, the Duke of Norfolk personally tearing the George, the jewelled badge of the garter from his neck, gleeful as a boy robbing a nest, the other lords crowding in to pluck at the man they'd bowed to on Thursday. He shouted at them, they say. He asked if he was a traitor and called on his own conscience and threw his bonnet down on the floor. This detail runs through the palace by supper and no one can stop repeating it. The bonnet on the floor, the most feared man in England reduced in one afternoon to a man whose hat is on the ground. Then the barge, the private watergate, the tower, and the machine does not stop. That is the horror you can never afterward make outsiders feel. That same evening the king dines to music. The council meets in the morning as usual, minus one chair, and the business of the realm flows on around the hole where Cromwell was, the way the Thames flows around a removed pile, one swirl and then smooth. Within days his offices are being dealt out. Within a week men who owed him everything, whose sons he placed and whose debts he paid, are explaining to each other in window bays how they had always, privately, had their doubts. His fall is arranged by the same instrument he perfected himself, an act of attainder, condemnation by Parliament, no trial, no chance to answer, the accused simply defined into guilt by statute, a legal machine Cromwell had oiled with his own hands for use on other men, and there is not a soul at court who fails to notice the shape of that, and not a soul who says it aloud. Why did he fall? You know part of it better than the council does, because part of it passed through the little room month by month in that flat counting voice. The marriage. He had bound the king to a woman the king could not love, for an alliance that the shifting weather of Europe was already making unnecessary. The Emperor and France cooling toward each other again, exactly on cue, so that the German friendship Cromwell bought at the price of the king's bed turned out to be a coat purchased for a winter that ended the week it was delivered. And Norfolk had a niece, Catherine, 19, small and auburn and merry, waved like a lure across the king's sight line all that spring at the bishop's suppers, and the king, 49 that month, sick, ashamed, aching to be young, rose to her like a trout in May. Between the failed marriage and the eager uncles, between an old nobility that had waited 10 years to kill the blacksmith's son, and a king who wanted his freedom faster than the law could politely provide it, Cromwell became, in a matter of weeks, more useful guilty than innocent, but the deepest cause you saw with your own eyes, over 3 years, from the worn patch of floor, and it is the one thing you know that the ballad makers will never get right. It was not that Cromwell served badly, it was that he served too well for too long. He had made himself the answer to every question, and there is a species of gratitude in kings, in this king above all, that ferments over years into something almost indistinguishable from hatred, because every debt to a subject is a small proof that the king was not sufficient alone, and this king cannot bear in the marrow of him, in the place the little room let you glimpse, to be insufficient. Compton knew, buried so deep that not even the king can see it. Cromwell's genius was too large to bury. He was, at the end, a mirror the size of a minister, and the king broke him the way sick men break mirrors. On the 28th of July, on Tower Hill, in front of the usual holiday crowd, they cut off his head. You are not there. The court is nowhere near. The court that day is 30 miles up the river at Oatlands, where, the timing is not an accident. Nothing at this court is an accident. The king marries Catherine Howard in cheerful privacy, while the axe comes down. The old order of ceremonies reversed. A wedding within and a beheading without, and the machine absorbs both without missing a meal. but you see the head. Weeks later, crossing the bridge into Suffolk on the King's business, you make yourself look up at the gatehouse poles, because Compton's ghost tells you a man in your office has no right to look away. And among the tarred and nameless others there it is. And here is what undoes you. Standing in the traffic with carts jolting past and a woman beside you selling cherries. It is small, boiled and tarred, weather-shrunk, anonymous. The head that held the treasury, the church, the law, the whole renovated machinery of England, item by item, statute by statute, 10 years of the future filed in one skull. And now the gulls stand on it, and the cherry woman doesn't glance up, and London goes about its noise below, and the only man on the bridge who knows what he is looking at is a gentleman from Herefordshire, holding his hat against the river wind and doing sums, because you are doing sums. Be honest, you stand on that bridge and you do the one sum that matters. Cromwell stood closer to the king than any minister in memory. You stand closer than Cromwell ever did. Cromwell knew the king's business. You know the king's body, the fear at 3 a.m, the weeping on the velvet box, the sentence about no one living who ever saw me run. By every law of this court's physics, your knowledge is more dangerous than his was, and your protections are less. No earldom, no faction, no army of clerks. A purse lying open on a table, Denny said. And yet, that evening back at Oatlands you attend within. The new marriage is 5 days old. The king is sunburned from hunting and pleased with the world and his young wife and his own leg, which the summer has been kind to. And on the velvet box in the little room, drowsy with wine and August, he talks. About the stag they took, about a mare he means to buy, about the girl a little, in the shy bragging way of an old man who cannot believe his luck. And then, out of nothing, into the candle, in the flat counting voice you know by now like a second language. He lied to me about the marriage, you know. Essex said she excelled the moon. A long pause, the candle fidgets. The truest servant I ever had. Both sentences in one breath, with no sign anywhere in his face that they are at war with each other. And there, Master Merrick, standing very still on the worn floorboards with the linen over your arm, you finally see the whole animal, the entire truth of the man, and the reign and the age. And it is this. Both things are true in him at once, forever. The grief and the killing, the love and the axe, and no wall between them. And it is not madness, and it is not, quite, evil. It is what happens to a human soul when you tell it from the cradle that it is the voice of God, and then trap it in a dying body, in a nest of flatterers with an axe always in reach. He will mourn Cromwell. Later, historians will record him raging at his council that they had made him destroy the best servant he ever had on light pretexts, and it will be true rage, real grief from the same hand that signed everything. The office is to hold the door of the one small room where the King of England is allowed to be mortal. You held it before you understood what could come through it. Now you understand, and you go on holding it. For 8 more years you will hold it through the Girl Queen's terrible fall the very next winter, which you will not be able to think about for a long time afterward. Through the last marriage, the kind widow who reads him theology and rubs his leg. Through the swellings and the sinkings, the chair they build to carry him when the legs give out entirely, the stinking, sacred, ever larger body borne through his palaces by relays of strong men, while the eyes in the huge face stay as quick and blue and dangerous as ever. You will hold the door until a January night in 1547, when Denny, who is by then what Compton was, performs the bravest act of the age. He tells the king to his face that it is time to think of his end. A sentence that had been treason to speak for years, and the king takes it quietly and asks for Cranmer, and Cranmer comes through the frozen dark, too late for words, in time for a hand to be gripped. But that is a story for another night, and it is far away still, and you are 25, standing on a bridge in the summer wind, alive, employed, afraid in the reasonable proportion, with cherry sellers below, and dead ambition above, and the whole roaring city between. You buy the cherries in the end. They are excellent. You eat them walking, spitting the stones into the Thames one by one all the way across the bridge, and every stone that drops into the brown water is a thought you're choosing, deliberately, professionally, forever, not to finish. Remember everything. Know nothing. It works. God forgive you, it works. After that summer, time changes speed on you, the way it does once life has found its shape. The days stay slow. The days at court are always slow. Ceremony is the art of making an hour weigh a week. But the years begin to pour. You learn the great wheel of the royal calendar until it turns inside you like a second pulse. Autumn at Windsor or Hampton Court for the hunting, the king's high season when the leg permits, whole weeks of it, the horns at dawn, the hounds' voices carrying over wet bracken, the smell of the stables, leather and ammonia and warm horse, soaked so deep into your gown that perfumers despair, winter in the river palaces, Whitehall and Greenwich, the season of masks and ambassadors, the Christmas 12 days when the household triples and the wine runs by the ton, and even the pages are up till midnight, Candlemas, Shrovetide, the great fires, spring on the move, the sweetening season, the barges loaded, the same crates, the same tides, summer on progress through the shires, the whole 1,000-headed machine crawling from great house to great house, eaten each host halfway to ruin. A visit from the king is an honour that costs the honoured the price of a small war, and men beggar themselves for it gladly, and that too is the physics of closeness, working on everyone, everywhere, always. You learn the body's calendar alongside it because the two are one calendar now. The leg is better in the saddle months and worse in the wet. The great feasts bind him. Lent, which he keeps with genuine devotion, loosens him and sweetens his temper, so that the realm is measurably better governed in March, a fact you've never said aloud to anyone and never will. He grows. That is the plain word for the years. He grows, season upon season, the armourers letting out the harness inch by inch. The measurements are in the accounts. Future centuries will read them like a fever chart. The chairs rebuilt stronger, the horses chosen bigger, the stick becoming 2 sticks becoming, at the very last the carried chair. And the more the body fails, the more the body rules, the whole apparatus of England arranging itself year by year, ever more tightly around the question that is asked first every morning in every embassy in Europe, and never once, on pain of death, asked plainly in his hearing. How is the king? You could answer it. Every morning you are among the 5 men on earth who could answer it. You never do. Your silence becomes a known quantity at court, an institution almost, like a wallmen check is still standing. Merrick says nothing. Norfolk's men stop asking after the 2nd year. The ambassadors never stop. The French one at a supper once spends an entire course praising the cider of Herefordshire with such tender specificity that you understand a courier has been sent to research your childhood, and you are flattered. genuinely at the expense, and you tell him warmly that he is quite right. The apples of the marches are the finest in the world and nothing else, and he toasts you with real amusement in his tired eyes, one professional to another. Your hands change. This is a small thing, and it is not. The scald marks of the great night fade by autumn, but the hands that come after are not the hands you brought from Herefordshire. Broader, steadier, seamed. The crack at the thumb long healed into a fine white line you can find in candlelight. Hands that know the weight of a silver basin filled exactly to the safe line. The resistance of a linen knot tied flat. The temperature of water at wrist truth. The specific gravity of a sleeping king's arm lifted to slide a pillow under. The heaviest thing you've ever lifted, a sleeping king's arm, heavier than any log because logs may be gripped. Sometimes at mass you look down at them, folded, and think, these are what the wage is paid to. The rest of me just carries them from room to room. You marry in the 4th year a knight's daughter from Gloucestershire, sensible and quick, who asked you at your second meeting what it was you actually did for the king, and watched you fail to answer, and said, I see. You hold your tongue for a living, and married you anyway, and never asked again in 30 years, which you came to understand was the largest dowry any man at that court ever received. The manors on the Welsh marches prosper mildly. Your father dies in the orchard he stood in when your letter came, in blossom time quickly the good death, and you're given leave to ride home for the burying, and standing at the grave in the small church you grew up in, among faces that knew you before your face was a wall, you find you cannot weep until the vicar, an old man who taught you your letters, takes your hand at the door and asks with no idea what he's asking. And is it a good service up there with the king? And you say yes, and it is even true. And then, on the road back east, alone for the only fortnight of your adult life, in an empty lane with the hedges white and the bees loud, you stop the horse and weep for a solid hour. For your father, for Compton, for the small tarred head on the bridge, for the boy with 4 points tied who wanted the little room and got it. And then you wash your face in a stream, and ride on, and arrive at Hampton Court with a face like a wall, and take up the linen. On quiet evenings, there are quiet evenings, even there, the machine breathes. You sit sometimes in the window of your own lodging, 2 rooms now, a fire of your own, a wife reading by it, and watch the light die over the river or the park, and take the day apart the way your wife takes apart a seam, what was said, who stood where, which door opened for whom. It is not brooding, it is maintenance. Every man of the chamber does it. You have seen Denny at it, motionless in a window bay at dusk, filing the day. The court by night settles into its second life below you, the yeoman calling the watch, torchlight crossing a courtyard, a lute somewhere, always a lute somewhere, music leaking out of the age at every joint, and the great dark bulk of the royal lodgings with one window still lit, and behind the window the fire that never goes out, and beside the fire the body, and around the body, in rings, the realm asleep. You think, on those evenings, about the strangeness you have stopped finding strange, that the summit of your life, the thing your grandchildren's grandchildren will find in the patent rolls with your name on it, is bounded by a velvet box in a small warm room, that the most secret archive in England is not in any muniment chest but behind your own eyes, uncopied, unburnable, and will go into the ground with you entire. that you have been present at more history than any chronicler alive and can prove none of it and want to prove none of it, and of that the office everyone below stairs jokes about. You know the jokes, you have heard them through walls, and they are good jokes, and they are all, every one of them missing the point, is in truth the last human post in the kingdom, the place where someone must simply be with him, the terror of the age in the plainest animal moments of his existence, and be kind, invisibly, professionally, without ever once calling it kindness. Mercy, buried deep, deeper. Tomorrow there will be the fire built and the water tested and the shirt warmed against your wrist. Tomorrow there will be the doors and the bows and the window bays, the ambassador angling, the linen counted, the leg unwound and read like a state paper. Tomorrow the enormous, glittering, frightened machine will assemble the day around one aching body, and you will take your place in it at the exact centre, on the worn patch of floor that now bears the print of your feet layered over Compton's, as one day another man's will layer over yours. But that's tomorrow. Tonight the fire is low, and the wife is reading, and the river runs, and the king. You would know otherwise. The palace would know. The night itself would change its sound. The king sleeps. Let him. Let all of it. You bank your own small fire and go up to your own bed, which has a mattress now, and a wife's warmth in it, and no door on earth that can summon you before the light. Well, one door. There is always the one door. You sleep with an ear toward it all your life, and you would not. This is the thing, this is the whole confession. You would not have it otherwise. So come down now at the end to one last night. Any night. A night without a date. Because by now the nights have folded into one another the way the years did. The palace is quiet. Quiet the way only a full house can be quiet. 1,000 sleepers breathing under one sprawl of roofs, the sum of them a kind of hush with a pulse in it. The watch has been set, the passwords have been passed. Down in the kitchens the fires are banked under their ash, dreaming of the morning's 600 loaves. The spit boys are asleep on the warm hearthstones, curled like cats. The clerks of the green cloth have counted the candle ends and locked the spicery and gone to their beds justified. In the stables a horse shifts and sighs. On the river the tide is turning, the small slap and gurgle of it against the water stairs, a barge nosing its mooring, a waterman's distant cough carried on black water, and you are on the pallet by the door. Say it is early again, say it is the first winter again, the straw and the cold boards and the rushlight, or you're in the good bed of the later years with the fire banked and the wife breathing beside you. It does not matter which. It is the same man lying there, and the same city of sleep around him, and the same one-lit window somewhere in the dark heart of the building, and the same listening, faithful, half-asleep, lifelong, toward the one door. Your body is tired in the honest ways, the knees that have knelt on rushes 10,000 times, the forearms that have held basins level while the arms of the state wash themselves, the hands seamed and steady, lying open now on the coverlet, off duty, empty at last, the small white line at the thumbnail. You are warm enough, you are fed, you are, by every measurement your strange world keeps, a made man. The wage, the manners, the patent in ink, the place at the centre. But that is not why you can sleep. You can sleep because the breathing beyond the door is slow tonight, because the linen is white and the fire is fed and the water will be warm when it is wanted, because the room where the most frightening man in the world is allowed to be only a man has been kept. One more day, safe and small and ordinary, and keeping it was yours to do, and it is done, and no one will ever know, and it does not need to be known. That's the whole of it. That was always the whole of it. The rush-like gutters. The dark comes up soft around the edges of things, the way it does, the way it has for you every night since Herefordshire, since the child you were slept under the eaves listening to your father's orchard move in the wind. The sounds of the palace grow fainter, or maybe you are just listening less. The boundary begins to blur, the good blur, the body making its slow, honest argument that consciousness is no longer required, that the watch is set, that other hands hold the doors now, that you may, put it all down. So put it down. Centuries will pass. The palace under this roof will change beyond recognition. Greenwich will be pulled down to the ground. Grass and a naval college will stand where the Privy Gallery ran, and tourists will walk over the exact spot of your pallet without a shiver. Whitehall will burn, all 2,000 rooms of it, in a single January night far in the future, and leave one banqueting hall standing like a tooth. Hampton Court will survive, and school children will troop through the great kitchens where the spit boys slept, and stand in a small room off a bedchamber, and giggle at a velvet box behind a rope, and be hurried along, and not one of them will understand what the room was for, and that is all right. Rooms keep their own counsel. The king will die, as all of it was always going to end, on a black winter morning with the tide out, and the enormous body will be carried to Windsor by a procession 4 miles long, and within a lifetime the dynasty itself will be a story. The son a brief candle after all. The daughters each a reign, and then strangers on the throne, and then other strangers, and the whole burning question that organized your world, the question of one man's health, will cool into paper, into parchment, in boxes, into the accounts where a scholar with cold hands 400 years from now will find the entries, the velvet for the stool, the swan's down, the gilt nails, the payments to the laundresses, and sit back and laugh, and then stop laughing and begin slowly to understand. The office will fade. The name will become a curiosity, a pub quiz answer, a thing people tell each other at parties. Did you know? The most wanted job in Tudor England. And they will marvel at the strangeness of the past, at what people once did for power, and they will be right to marvel, and they will also miss it the way the crowds at Blackheath missed it, cheering the golden sun. Because here is what does not fade. In every age after yours forever, there will be someone sitting up at night within call of a failing body, a night nurse in a lit corridor, a daughter on a cot beside a hospital bed, listening to breathing, someone testing warmth against the inside of a wrist, someone making a terrible room ordinary with a level voice talking about apple blossom, about nothing, about anything, while frightened eyes hold on to the sound, someone doing the plain animal offices of care invisibly, without ever calling it kindness, for wages or for love or for both, and carrying afterward, all their lives, things they remember entirely and tell to no one. Some things don't change. The body doesn't change. The fear in the dark doesn't change. The mercy, buried deep, deeper, that doesn't change either. And the need, at the end of a long day of holding other people's doors, to lie down at last and let your own door be held by the night, that doesn't change at all. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Thomas Merrick on his pallet by the king's door, 500 years of nights ago, with the tide turning below the windows and the fire ticking down. Let the palace fade. Let the passwords go unremembered. Let the linen lie folded in the dark chest, smelling of lavender, ready for a morning that is not your concern. Let your hands lie open. They have carried enough. Whatever they held today, set it down. Whatever they must hold tomorrow, tomorrow will bring it, and tomorrow knows the way, and has never once needed your help to arrive. Let the noise quiet. Let the thoughts slow and soften, and finally stop. You are warm enough, safe enough. You have done enough. That's more than most in any century. That's enough. The last light gutters. Somewhere far off, a bell you're too tired to count. Good night.